Hey everyone, I'm Hashim. Thanks for joining. You're watching Pushing Film, and in today's video I want to talk a little bit about digital camera options that look like film. I'm someone who, as you might know, loves the look and process of shooting film, but it's not all I shoot. I also do a lot of digital photography, especially for my photography work. And for whatever reason it might be, shooting film all the time might not be affordable or practical for a lot of you guys watching too. And that might be due to inherent limitations that come with shooting film or certain requirements for a situation. Whatever that reason is for you, if you're interested in simulating some of that film look with digital photography, I'm going to share some tips and cameras and methods and things like that in this video. But keep in mind that obviously you'll never be able to 100% match the look of film. You can get pretty close, but you definitely can't match it perfectly, let alone the experience of shooting film. So with all that in mind, let's get into some of the categories that I've got laid out for this video. So the first one and the first group of cameras or methods that I find is a really accessible one for getting the film look and even some of the experience with digital photography is the Fujifilm X line of cameras. Because they're quite modern cameras, it's a really accessible and versatile method to get a little bit of that film look with the built-in simulations that they tend to have built into these cameras, but also the way that the cameras operate. They tend to have all these manual controls and dials and even the looks and ergonomics of the film cameras of yesterday. So you can get a little bit of that experience, and it's a really easy way to get a bit of that look if you just, for example, shoot JPEG, or even if you were to shoot RAW and apply those simulations in something like Lightroom. Better yet, you have the ability to create your own custom film simulations or tweak the existing ones, or find a huge gallery of film so-called recipes online using websites like Fuji X Weekly, where people have shared a huge amount of great film simulations that try to emulate particular stocks or even just generic film looks. So if you want some of the modern conveniences of cameras like the Fujifilm X series and getting a little bit of that film look and experience, that is my first category. If you want a little bit more depth on this particular example, I did an entire video comparing the Fujifilm with the film shooting experience. This video was launched not too long ago, and I went into depth of comparing the experience of using the X Pro in comparison to my film cameras, and also did some direct comparisons of some of the film simulations, such as Fuji Acros simulation versus the real stock, Pro 400H versus Pro Neg High and Superior, and all these other comparisons. So definitely check that out if you want to dive deeper into how the Fujifilm X line of cameras can match that film shooting look and experience. So the second tip I have for getting the film look with digital photography is to look for and use cameras with older, particularly CCD sensors. So before CMOS sensors took over at least 10 years ago, CCD sensors were commonplace. And these days, compared to more modern digital cameras, older options with CCD sensors give what many people describe as a quote-unquote filmic look. And a lot of that is probably due to the fact that these sensors had a more limited dynamic range, more vibrant, and perhaps even unrealistic colors, or maybe just the fact that they came with older hardware such as lenses, which lended itself to that older kind of filmic look, especially when you combine it with the fact that they were lower resolution as well. So there are some really popular examples of CCD cameras that people tend to look for because they are known for having a little bit of that sort of film look. And some examples of those are the earlier Leica M cameras, such as the M8 and M9, and especially the Olympus cameras from before around 2008 or so, because a lot of these Leica and Olympus cameras actually had sensors which were not only CCD sensors, but they were made by Kodak, which for whatever reason, maybe it's their particular color science when designing those sensors, gave a little bit more of that look people associated with film. But it's really not limited to those two brands. Any CCD camera that was designed from some time ago will tend to have more of that compressed dynamic range, vibrant colors, and aspects that you would associate with the film look. And even just straight out of camera shooting JPEGs, you will get a really nice, punchy, vibrant look out of some of these cameras. Some older CMOS sensors, such as the one in the Fujifilm X Pro 1, is known to have quite a filmic look. You've got older SLRs, perhaps not this one here, but something like the 5D Mark I is also known to have a little bit of a film look. And then there's a whole variety of unusual brands and sensors such as the Epson RD1 and Foveon sensors, Sigma cameras. There's a huge range, and you can even go for some mainstream ordinary DSLRs that were commonplace from those early 2000s, such as the Nikon D series. I recently dug out some shots that I took on a Nikon D50, which I used to borrow from on campus at university when I was studying back around 2006-07. And I used those photos for a recent video talking about shooting around the water and such. And just looking at them reminded me how much sensors have come a long way, not only in resolution, but the way they render colors. Just the JPEGs straight out from what I was looking at gave a little bit more of that filmic look. So if you're in the market to look at this option, I would definitely suggest looking at something like DP Review's website, where you can search and categorize by the sensor type, and you can choose CCD sensor and a whole bunch of other categories if you want. Bring up a big list of cameras that had that type of sensor, and then go further from there in terms of finding a camera that fits your budgets, whether it's a small camera, a larger one, interchangeable lenses or not, and so on. So don't limit yourself to the really popular options. Do a search, jump into that rabbit hole a bit and see what you can find and experiment with. So the next category is sort of a subcategory of the one I just talked about, but this one is compact digital cameras from a while ago. So smaller compact digital cameras, or better known as Digicams sometimes, such as this one with the CCD sensor, which was from around 2010 or 11. And this one is a 10 megapixel camera, and it still produces great results. And the great thing is a lot of these smaller Digicams tend to have that filmic look, not only because they have the CCD sensor in these older models, but also because it's a smaller sensor, it has a lower resolving lens, and the zoom lenses that are built into them often don't have as much sharpness and resolution. All of that combined tends to give a bit more of a lo-fi film-like look, and usually at a really affordable price. This particular Olympus XZ1 cost me $100 on Gumtree, including 3 batteries, the charger, a couple of different lens caps and such, and it still works great. And I've used it for quite a variety of examples of shots, including some shots on the street and even nature. It renders colors really nicely with a lot more vibrance than you would get from modern digital cameras, and it definitely tends to have that sort of slide film look, just straight out of the card when I import the photos from this. So it can be a lot of fun to shoot these old Digicams while also getting that film look without too much extra effort or investment. So if you want to jump down that rabbit hole a little bit more of the smaller, more compact digital cameras, or even small interchangeable lens compact cameras, I would definitely recommend checking out 1 Month 2 Cameras. She has a wealth of knowledge, more than I would ever have, when it comes to these older cameras and different sensor types and how they output colors and stuff like that. So I definitely recommend checking out the goldmine of example shots and cameras that she has posted about and reviewed on the Instagram page and on the YouTube channel, which I will link in the description of this video. So that's definitely a resource that I would recommend if you want to try that path. All right, so the fourth and next category I want to talk about and suggest to you is the idea of adapting vintage film camera lenses to modern digital cameras. A lot of the time, the look that people associate with film photos is actually due to the older lenses that are being used on those cameras. Oftentimes, they're from the 70s, and they have less coatings, they have less sharpness, more character, and just a different rendering than you get from the more modern clinical lenses that come on modern digital cameras. So if you already have a digital camera, or you're willing to get into a digital camera that can have interchangeable lenses, look into whether or not you can adapt certain lenses from older manufacturers to it, such as these Pentax M42 lenses, old Nikon F lenses, and so on. For example, with mirrorless cameras, you tend to have more ability to adapt lenses too, including from older SLRs and even rangefinders, such as this little Leica lens, which I could adapt to the Fujifilm X system. Currently, it has a Minolta lens adapted to it, Minolta 28mm. And oftentimes the adapters are really cheap and accessible. They don't cost too much because these older lenses are manual focus, so you have to keep that in mind. You won't have autofocus, generally speaking. Otherwise, there's a huge range of options out there once you consider that and the cost of the adapter. And this can be a great way to get that vintage filmic look on a modern digital camera, whether or not it's a Fuji X or CCD sensor or whatever. This can be quite a effective way to get some of that look without necessarily going for a particularly old digital sensor. All right, so tip number 5 I have is to use editing or presets in post, in digital, in something like Lightroom to actually edit the photos to look more like film. This one is probably the most accessible way in terms of investment, because all it takes is mainly just a bit of time and practice in terms of applying a preset or editing it yourself, or even better yet, doing a bit of both. And I don't want to recommend any particular brand or type of preset. I'm not going to try and sell you any of my presets or anything like that, because there's so many out there, and a lot of the time they're hit and miss. You're not going to necessarily apply a Kodak Portra preset and get something that looks anywhere near actual Kodak Portra film, because there's so many other variables involved. But what I want to try and relay here is that just by experimenting a little bit, even if it's applying a preset first and then doing a bit of tweaking on top of that, you can learn to replicate some of that film look. And a really good way to do that is if you actually shoot some film, or you take a film example from someone else with a similar situation that you're shooting in, and get a digital photo that kind of matches and bring it closer to that film shot. Try and learn what it is that you're wanting to do to bring that shot closer to the film scan, whether it's playing with the hue and saturation of certain colors, what needs to be done to the dynamic range and contrast, to the clarity, to the sharpness, all of these things that takes a little bit of time to learn and can be a lot of fun. Otherwise, you can just slap on some presets and just see how they go, and maybe do a little bit of tweaking to the brightness and white balance, and that'll get you a little bit closer. But I'll try and put some links in the description of the video for some good starting points. But again, there's plenty out there. I'm sure you'll find plenty of results if you look for film simulations or presets for your editing software. So I know this particular category can have a bit of a learning curve, and if you are after more content showing you how to match digital photos to film scans, let me know, and I'll look at doing something in the future. And you can even consider jumping onto my Buy Me a Coffee page and the membership I'm looking at launching on there, because in the future I will be hoping to do some exclusive live streams, including some film matching tutorials and things like that. All right, guys, so those are the 5 main tips I had for digital cameras and methods and tips to get it to look like film. But I have a 6th one, which is actually combining all of those previous 5. So the 6th tip I have is to actually stack any of the previously mentioned camera types or methods that I've talked about already, such as taking a Fujifilm X camera with its built-in film simulations and adapting an old manual lens from the 80s, for example, or finding something like the previously mentioned Nikon D50, which also has a CCD sensor, adapting an old 70s lens from something like an M42, and then also applying film simulations or presets and or editing that shot to look more like a similar film scan. That can probably bring you closer by combining all of those methods. If you're willing to do that, I think that is a point worth mentioning, that you can stack some of these tips I've already talked about. And another one, for example, which I didn't want to give its own category, but using things like diffusion filters such as Tiffin's Pro Mist, which I have an example of here. And with these, I would recommend not to go too strong on them, but the Tiffin Pro Mist is a really good filter that you can use to get a little bit of that diffusion, to give you a softer look that looks a little bit more like film. It doesn't specifically make your photo look more like film. It's just that it's going to soften the highlights, add a bit of blooming, as you can see in the neon sign behind me there, which can lend itself more to the film look. Because film has softer highlights, some people like to use these with photography, myself included sometimes, to give a bit more of a softer look to the highlights. But I would generally recommend sticking to the lower strength filters. As I mentioned, I like to use 1/8 and not really go above that, because you don't want it to overtake the look of the photo, and just a little bit can go a long way. All right, guys, that's it. That's my video on digital cameras that look like film, and hopefully some of those tips on methods and tricks you can do to kind of bring you closer to that film look. I hope you got something out of it. Keep in mind that obviously none of this will ever match the unique experience of shooting on film, and neither the look. You can get it pretty close, but it's not going to be 100% match once again. So I'd highly recommend actually shooting film if you've never done it, just to get an idea. But if it's something that's just way out of your reach, you're not looking to invest in, perhaps some of this stuff I've mentioned can bring you a little bit closer. Or if you're someone who already shoots film, you're just trying to offset some of those costs and maybe do something like I do when I shoot weddings, where I might shoot a bit of film and digital. I try and get my digital shots to look a little bit closer to the film scans, because I love those colors. I love the rendering, the tones of the film stocks that I might shoot at something like a portrait session or a wedding. So using some of these methods are what I've done in the past to bring those digital scans closer to the film stock. So that's another great reason that I find it's worth employing some of these methods. So if you did find any of this helpful, let me know. Consider supporting the channel through my Buy Me a Coffee page, which I've been slowly launching over the last few months, and I'm adding a membership option at the moment as well. So if you want to support me through that, this video isn't sponsored by anyone, but you can use Buy Me a Coffee if you want to make a one-time donation or join as a member. I'll be adding some perks as time goes on. I'm still figuring that all out, but one of the things could be the exclusive channel on Discord, some of those exclusive live streams I mentioned earlier, discounts on future zines and so on. So that would be a much appreciated way if you want to support the channel. Otherwise, you can consider checking out and buying one of my zines, such as the sun-dried strip, which is available on my website. So I hope you found this video helpful and that you got something out of it, and I'll see you on the next Pushing Film video.